Now, of course, today we're talking about the competing cyber bills on Capitol Hill, that to ultimately protect our nation and other nations out there as well. Dilip, I'm going to start with you on the program today. If you can give me an overview of the Cybersecurity Act 2012 and the revisions to that act.
Sure. Well, Senator Lieberman and Collins have been working on this project for some years now, in fact, and we're seeing it all come to a head on the Senate floor, potentially beginning even tomorrow. So they had released a bill last fall or earlier in the spring, I think it was, and the bill came under some significant criticism, generally because it was perceived to be too regulatory regarding the requirements imposed on the owners and operators of critical infrastructure. That is, electricity grid operators, power plants, chemical plants, and the like, most of which is in private ownership. So what we've seen now, after a great deal of negotiation in the Senate, is a new version of the bill that they've just released last week. It certainly takes a less regulatory approach towards how critical infrastructure is handled. It also attempts to address significant concerns that the civil liberties community had regarding information sharing by private companies regarding their customer data. So there generally seems to be more support for the latest version of the bill, but there are still some significant concerns that are out there. Industry is still taking a pretty close look at this legislation, but they definitely seem to be moving in a positive direction.
Now, Joseph, I know that TIA has a cybersecurity white paper that was just very recently rolled out. Before I let you talk about that, I actually had a chance to look it over yesterday and pulled out an excerpt or two. And I'm going to go ahead and put that up for our viewers on our screen. I'm going to read that. The primary concern is that imposing rigid regulatory requirements by their very nature will be unable to keep up with rapidly evolving technologies and threats, would require industry to focus on obsolete security requirements rather than facing the actual threat at hand, effectively making systems less secure. Joseph, what does that mean?
Well, if you look at the history of the government trying to regulate technology innovation always takes faster than regulation. That's just the nature of technology, and it's a good thing to some degree. With cybersecurity in particular, when we see all of these attacks develop, over time we've seen all the different viruses, the worms, the different types of actors entering the space. And basically, for the government to be able to keep up with that, they would need to be able to regulate in real time. And for anyone who follows what happens in Washington, D.C., the government cannot regulate in real time. It's not possible. And so what would happen is if the government did come in and start mandating requirements on owners and operators, on the equipment vendors, essentially what that would do is that would create a scenario where they are focused on going through a box checking exercise, making sure, oh yeah, we meet this requirement, we meet this requirement, we meet this requirement, whereas the threat has evolved into something completely different. And so more where the focus needs to be from a regulatory perspective is giving industry the flexibility that they need. Focus on the ecosystem, improve information sharing, improve R&D, and create this ecosystem that is able to respond to these threats in real time in a way that the government just is incapable of doing.